Okay, I'm going to call Washoe County Planning Commission meeting for Tuesday, January 7th, 2020. First on the agenda, determination of the quorum, and I'd like Mr. Lloyd to make an announcement before we call roll.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we received the resignation for Commissioner Horan. Phil Horan, he did in fact move out of the unincorporated part of Washoe County into the unincorporated city, so he will no longer be eligible to sit on this planning commission. So he has been a very valuable member of this commission and would like your assistance in preparing a resolution at an upcoming meeting, if that's possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. Pledge.
No determination.
Mr. Bruce, would you like to lead us in the pledge?
Quorum. He has to do a quorum.
Oh, I'm sorry. Determination of quorum.
Larry Chesney.
Here.
Francine Donchik.
Here.
James Barnes.
Here.
Thomas Bruce.
Here.
Sarah Shavelicek.
Here.
Kate Nelson.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay. Pledge. We're ready. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Mr. Edwards, would you please notice us on the ethics law?
Commissioners are reminded that if with respect to any matter or any person coming before the commission today, 1, you have received a gift or loan, 2, you have a pecuniary interest, 3, you have a commitment in a private capacity such as a family, employment, business, or similar relationship, or 4, you provided representation or counseling before an agency to a person or entity for compensation within the last year on a matter being considered, then you must disclose that gift, loan, interest, commitment, or prior representation at the time the matter is being considered. And you must furthermore abstain from deliberation or voting on the matter if it is clear that the gift, loan, interest, commitment, or prior representation would materially affect the independence of judgment of a reasonable person. Commissioners are also reminded that under the Planning Commission rules, if you have had any contact outside this meeting with any persons interested in a matter coming before the Commission today, you should disclose the nature of that contact at this meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. Mr. Lloyd, could you notice us on the appeal procedure, please?
Yeah, most decisions rendered by the Planning Commission are appealable to the Board of County Commissioners. If you disagree with the decision of the Planning Commission, you may, and you want to appeal its action, you may do so in writing within 10 calendar days from the date that the decision being appealed is signed by the Planning Commission Chair and or the Secretary of the Planning Commission, filed with the Secretary of the Planning Commission, and mailed to the original applicant in the proceeding being appealed in accordance with Washoe County Code. Please call the planning staff immediately at 328-6100 for information on the appeal procedure and application fee.
Thank you. We'll move on next to general public comment.
We have Carol Black, followed by Judith Miller.
Good evening. First of all, I want to apologize. I'm here to talk about short-term rentals, and I ask your indulgence. My quite elderly husband is out in the car, and I need to get him home, so I am not able to stay for the whole meeting this evening, so I apologize for that. Is it okay to begin?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. I sent you all packets with some slides in them and a letter and some additional information. I've distributed to you a slimmed-down slide deck, and I want to just go through a few of the high points, if that's okay, this evening. First of all, oh, good, it's working. And I don't know how well this is going to project, but there we go. I actually think that I would recommend that you not approve the proposal, despite all of the very intense work the staff has put into it and the many good components that are in the short-term rental ordinance this evening. And my reasoning for that is that I don't believe the findings have been met. And secondly, there have been a lot of restrictions on the parameters that can be used to address the issues. And thirdly, I think the zoning, components of the regulatory and zoning pieces that really are not compliant with either TRPA or NRS, so I think that's an issue. Occupancy is a major concern. The short-term rentals, the ordinance proposal will not limit the number of short-term rentals in the area up by Tahoe. In fact, it probably will encourage more. And the short-term rentals have increased occupancy in the area substantially already. You can see some of these numbers. They're pretty impressive. The vehicle trips per day, TRPA uses a threshold of 200 to think about it. There's a lot more already, and there will be more if there are more short-term rentals. Those numbers are very impressive, I think. Airbnb had 27,000 more arrivals to the Tahoe area last summer compared to the previous summer. 27,000 more short-term rental arrivals. This occupancy increase is a risk to all of us. Parking is a mess. Those are cars parked under no parking signs. There are tiers in the proposal for different levels of short-term rentals. You'll hear about that from Kelly. This is what's proposed. I'm sorry. Am I losing my eyesight, or it's what happened? Is it fuzzy? I'm losing my eyesight. Okay, 10 is what's proposed as the threshold between needs a discretionary permit or doesn't. Actual census data for residences, 2.5 occupants. Actual average short-term rental from an IVGID survey a few years ago, 4.5. 10's a big difference. That's a big difference impact on the community and the homes. I suggest you lower that to 4 for the lowest threshold. And one more quick thing, if I may, is there are collateral impacts to changing the zoning and changing how these are viewed. These are transient lodging. All other transient lodging in all other code has
Mr. Chair.
rules and
Mr.
regs
Chair.
about public health.
Ma'am, your time is up.
Okay, these are bugs that you're not protected from.
Your time is up.
Sharps, hazards, you don't have any protection in these
Your
short-term
time
rentals.
is up.
Thank you for your attention. Appreciate it.
Next.
Judith Miller.
Judith Miller, Incline Village. I'm also a member of the Incline Village Crystal Bay Citizens Advisory Board, but I'm speaking this evening as an individual. On a personal note, I have nothing against short-term rentals per se. I've enjoyed staying at them when I travel. My daughter manages actually a couple of them in the Tahoe Basin, but like many other things in life, they are great in moderation. The current debate about vacation rentals reminded me of the fairy tale, The Goose That Laid the Golden Egg, especially when I read the letter to the Planning Commission that you've probably seen from the director of the Tahoe Environmental Research Center, Dr. Jeffrey Shadlow. Your recommendations will directly impact the health and well-being of Lake Tahoe. The entire bi-state strategy of protecting Lake Tahoe is predicated on the concept of carrying capacity. And through this short-sighted set of recommendations, you risk pushing the system beyond its carrying capacity. I chose to move to Incline Village 12 years ago, not because it was a tourist attraction, but because it was a quiet residential area most of the year with a great sense of community. It was and is a mix of singles, retirees, and families with children in school. The average household size is less than 3. Summers were busy, but they weren't chaotic. The overarching problem that's somehow been avoided in this effort to regulate is the fact that STRs have occupancy that it's much more than normal residential use. Think about evacuation routes. We don't want to be another Paradise, California. Limiting STRs is absolutely essential for the safety and well-being of both the inhabitants and the tourists. Imagine what it would be like to see your community's population declining drastically, taken over by huge numbers of strangers, and watch the school enrollment dropping while it rises everywhere else in the county. That's already happened, by the way. To introduce amendments that don't address the problems created by having just too many STRs in Incline Village, Crystal Bay area is not acting responsibly. The matter was brought to the Board of the County Commissioners' attention 5 years ago by the IVCB CAB. But as Commissioner Jung commented, No one wanted to touch it. So now it's going to be more difficult. It's easy to look back, but today you have an opportunity to modify the amendments before sending them to the Board of County Commissioners. Please require some form of limits. We don't want to be another Orinda. We don't want to be another Paradise. Exceeding the carrying capacity of Lake Tahoe through unlimited short-term rentals will kill the goose. Thank you very much. Good evening.
I have a comment card here without an agenda number. It's for Blaine Johnson, so I'm not sure if Blaine wants to speak on this item or a later item.
I was going to speak on the short-term rentals as well.
Okay, I'll hold it for later.
Any other public comment? Okay, we're going to close general public comment and move on possible action to approve the agenda. Do I have
Move to approve.
a motion by Commissioner Savolacek and second by Commissioner Bruce? Any comments or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, agenda's approved. Let's move on to the approval of the December 3rd draft minutes.
Motion to approve?
Second. Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Doncheck and a second by Commissioner Bruce. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. We're going to move on to public hearings. First item on public hearings. Secretary Lloyd, would you like to tell us about?
Okay. This item is item 8A, Tentative Subdivision Map, case number WTM 19003, the Blue Oaks. This is for possible action, hearing, and discussion to approve a 10-lot, single-family residential tentative subdivision map and grading of 9,600 cubic yards of cut, 9,600 cubic yards of fill. Lots will range in size from 35,010 square feet to 47,110 square feet. Here representing Washoe County is our newest planner, Dan Collin.
Dan Colon, Washoe County Planning for the record.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
Adjust your mic.
Put the microphone.
I'm sorry, before you get started, Dan.
Yep.
Sorry, for the chair, were there any disclosures?
Oh, do we have any disclosures by any of the commissioners, ethics or ex parte on this? Seeing none, move on.
All right. Dan Colon, Washoe County Planning for the record. Before you have Blue Oaks, WTM 19-003. So as Mr. Lloyd previously stated, applicant is requesting a tentative map on 10 acres for 10 single-family residential lots. The parcel has a regulatory zone of low-density suburban. This allows a density of 1 dwelling unit per acre. The lots range in size from 35,010 square feet to 47,110 square feet. This meets the minimum lot size of 35,000 square feet for low-density suburban. The proposed subdivision also includes approximately 9,600 cubic yards of cut and 9,600 cubic yards of fill, which requires a major grading permit, which is also included in this application. You can see here we have a vicinity map. Just a heads up, to the north of the property and to the east of the property is the proposed Harris Ranch subdivision, which is going to be relevant as we move through this. Here we have the site. To the north, we have a retention basin in order to take care of all of the drainage from the subdivision. We have the proposed access to the north, in the northeastern corner, which is the proposed access through to the Harris Ranch subdivision. And then the current access is in the southwest corner, which is through Campo Rico Lane. So, reviewing the infrastructure, water will be provided by Truckee Meadows Water Authority and sewer through Washoe County. The main access to this subdivision will be through the access road for Harris Ranch. This has not been constructed at this time. Currently, the property is accessed, as I stated before, via Campo Rico Lane. However, if Harris Ranch subdivision is not constructed, Washoe County is requiring financial assurance to guarantee the construction of the portion of the road from Pyramid Highway to the entrance of the proposed subdivision to make sure that there is access provided to the subdivision. The proposed 10 residential lots are only anticipated to generate approximately 100 average daily trips and therefore do not require any type of sidewalk per Washoe County code. Now we're going to touch on the grading. The proposed grading for the subdivision meets all Washoe County code requirements, as you can see on the slide above. Just a quick overview of the schools. Schools for the project are going to be Taylor Elementary School, which is currently over capacity, Shaw Middle School, which is under capacity, and Spanish Springs High School, which is also over capacity. Notice was sent to 40 affected property owners within 800 feet of the site. This proposal went before the CAB on December 4th, 2019. They brought up concerns over continuing development of the area, sidewalk requirements, water and sewer service, and access to the site. Provided a list of the agencies who were given the opportunity to review the application. And here are the tentative map findings consistent with Washoe County Code. So staff recommends that the Planning Commission approve the requested tentative subdivision map along with the recommended conditions of approval. I have provided a possible motion for your convenience, and I'm available for any questions you might have. Thank you.
Any questions? At this time? Does the applicant have a presentation?
Hi, for the record, Ryan Sims from Axion Engineering. Good evening, Commissioners. I'm here on behalf of the applicant, the owner, and the current resident of the property, Ken Dixon, sitting in the audience. We have reviewed the full staff report, and we see no issues with it, and we consent to all the conditions of approval as written. And we appreciate staff's hard work on this one. We went through a couple iterations, so we appreciate their hard work in getting to where we're at, and also agree with their recommendation for approval. Again, we'll be available for any questions or comments. Thanks.
Any questions of the applicant? I guess I have one for staff that I want to get clear because I'm very familiar with the project. Harris Ranch hasn't even begun to start. And so the primary access to this property is going to be through the proposed entrance into Harris Ranch. Am I to understand that the applicant cannot proceed with construction until that entrance is put in? Is that a condition?
Dan Colon for the record. My understanding is that they do need to have access to the property. That's why the condition is that even if the Harris Ranch subdivision does not move forward, we will require financial assurance in order to connect via that same roadway to Pyramid Highway. It's in conditions of approval 2P for the record.
Okay, I just needed the assurance that all of a sudden the access road that's there currently is not going to end up being a temporary access road for 10 or 15 years till Harris Ranch decides to move on there's
The access to the, we're not recommending access via Campo Rico Lane, and
Great.
that's why there's no connectivity between the,
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any further questions? All right. Got any public comment on this?
No public comment.
Sure.
Chris Bronzik, Washoe County Planning. I just wanted to touch up one thing on your most recent question. So with the access off of Campo Rico Lane, the subdivision that they provided to us does show permanent access from the Harris Ranch Road. So a change like that would require them to come in for basically a full review again. So that's why that financial assurance condition was placed there.
Thanks, Chris.
Yep.
Any public comment?
No public comment.
Okay. Commissioners, any questions of staff or the applicant?
Mr. Chair?
Commissioner Seville?
Yes. I was looking in here for the department reports, but I don't see anything from fire. And were they satisfied with what you said on 2P about access? Because I'm concerned about access to the property for fire.
Chris Bronzik, Washoe County Planning. So we did reach out to the fire district. We provided photos as well as the plan and the application. We spoke to Mr. Don Kuhn regarding this. He was confident with the access as proposed with the Harris Ranch roadway. Because of the length of the cul-de-sac, there was no requirement for secondary access per fire, which is why we don't see that in the conditions at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Bruce? I have a question about the Spanish Springs Citizen Advisory Board. Did they have a yay or nay on that? That's not in here.
Dan Kalon, Washoe County Planning, for the record. They did make a recommendation in favor of approval.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would help if that were written here, but I don't see it.
Apologize.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Spillichak.
if I could reiterate that, it's very helpful to have either the minutes from the CAB or if they've made a recommendation to approve or deny. That's extremely helpful to us as planning commissioners.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Then I'll call for a motion.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Spillichak.
I move that after giving reasoned consideration to the information contained in the staff report and information received during the public hearing, the Washoe County Planning Commission approve with the conditions included as Exhibit A to this matter, tentative subdivision map, case number WTM 19-003 for Ken Dixon, having made all findings in accordance with Washoe County Code 110.608.25.
I second.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Spillichak and a second by Commissioner Donchak. Any discussion on the motion? I'll call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay. We'll move on to item B. Item B, Development Code Amendment Case Number WDCA 19-0008, short-term rentals.
Right, this is,
Chair Lloyd.
thank you. For possible action, hearing and discussion to amend Washoe County Code, Chapter 110, within Article 302, allowed uses to identify the types of review required for short-term rentals in each regulatory zone, and to add an administrative review permit to the list of review types within Article 304, Use Classification System, to update the residential use type description, add a definition for short-term rental, and update the definition for lodging services. And within Article 410, Parking and Loading, to update the off-street parking space requirements table to include a reference to short-term rentals. Chapter 110 would also be amended to create Article 319, short-term rentals, to establish standards, location limitations defining unpermitted short-term rentals as nuisances, occupancy limits, parking requirements, safety, security considerations, signage, noise thresholds, trash, garbage collection rules, insurance requirements, Tahoe area considerations, permitting requirements, enforcement process, fees, fines, and penalties associated with short-term rentals, and to amend Article 306, accessory uses and structures, by removing the procedural details for administrative review permits, with those details being relocated into a new article that is updated to reflect minor changes related to short-term rentals. That article would be created as Article 809, Administrative Review Permits. Short-term rentals are a type of temporary lodging of brief duration operated out of private residents such as homes, apartments, and condos. They are commonly made available through property management companies and online booking services, and are also referred to as vacation rentals that are generally booked for fewer than 28 days. The amendments may include the resolution of discrepancies that may arise within our existing Washoe County Code chapters as a result of new code language and other matters necessarily connected therewith and pertaining thereto. The Planning Commission may recommend approval of the proposed ordinance as submitted, recommend approval with modifications based on input and discussion at the public hearing, or recommend denial. Any material modifications that exceed the scope of the amendments being considered at this hearing may require continuation of the hearing for possible action at a future meeting. Representing Washoe County in this matter is Senior Planner Kelly Mullen.
Okay, do we have any disclosures by commissioners' ethics or ex parte communications?
I have a question. Since we all had private meetings with the planning department, should we disclose that?
I don't think that's a necessary disclosure. I don't think it hurts to make that disclosure, but I don't think that's anything that disqualifies you or causes any kind of legal
I
concern.
didn't think it would disqualify me, but I thought we should disclose it.
Yeah. I think you're free to make that disclosure. I don't think it's a necessary disclosure under the law. And you've made your disclosure, if anybody else wants to echo that as well. I think perhaps some clarification might be in order. When you say you've each met with planning staff, are you referring to yourself individually or on an individual basis? What are you referring to when you say that?
A planned meeting where we sat down with less than a quorum.
Yeah, okay. Now that's the clarification I was getting at. You didn't get together and have a meeting before the meeting is what I'm saying.
No, but there was more than one planning commissioner there, but no more than 3.
Yeah, okay. No, I think what you've disclosed is adequate, and I don't think it causes a problem.
Very good.
Thank you.
Then that would go for all of us that attended. Okay, Kelly. Ms. Mullen has asked for 20 minutes, and I have agreed, and so we'll set the clock at 20 minutes for her presentation.
Thank you,
And I
ma'am.
would ask all the commissioners to hold your questions till after her presentation is complete.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Kelly Mullen, Senior Planner with Washoe County. I'm going to start off with a little bit of background and context related to the short-term rental project, followed by an overview of the public engagement process we've been through thus far, and then following that with the recommendations from staff regarding proposed code changes, following up with next steps in the process. So first things first, just going back to basics in terms of definitions, what is a short-term rental? We are defining it as a type of temporary lodging. That's something that would generally be operated out of a private residence. That could be anything from a single-family home to a condo. Those short-term rentals are generally going to be available through property management services or through online booking services such as Airbnb and VRBO. They're also commonly referred to as vacation rentals and booked for fewer than 28 days at a time. So back in February 2019, we wound up going to the Board of County Commissioners to get the project started for short-term rentals, but kind of adding a little bit of context in terms of our starting point in the community at that time. Obviously, we've had short-term rentals exist in unincorporated Washoe County for decades. It's something where room tax has been collected for short-term rentals for the last several years, but we actually do not have any existing standards or regulations in place for short-term rentals, but we've been hearing a lot more from the community about impacts related to short-term rentals. And so when we went to the board last February, they made it clear that they wanted short-term rentals to be a use that is allowed. They did not want to see them banned. They wanted to establish a countywide ordinance and establish standards and a permitting process for short-term rentals. So the information on this screen is to give you a better idea in terms of frequency and distribution of short-term rentals in unincorporated Washoe County. And through a contract with a service provider called Host Compliance, we are able to actually, at this point, get a pretty good idea of where they're located within our jurisdiction. The map on the right, the black line indicates the jurisdictional boundary for unincorporated Washoe County, and each of those dots represents an individual short-term rental. And you can see that down in that bottom left-hand corner alongside the lake there, it's almost a solid block of red. And that certainly is where the highest concentration of short-term rentals are in our jurisdiction. Overall, across Washoe County, there's anywhere from 500 to over 1,000 short-term rentals that are active at any given time. However, those numbers vary pretty dramatically based on the season. And again, over 90% of them are located in the Incline Village, Crystal Bay area. Short-term rentals, obviously a very complex, controversial topic. It's something that we have a wide variety of stakeholders who have interest in short-term rentals, anywhere from folks who actually operate a short-term rental to those who live next to short-term rentals. Of course, also realtors and property managers, the lodging industry, businesses, community partners, affected agencies, all have a different perspective on short-term rentals. So going into this project, we recognized that it was pretty unlikely that we would achieve consensus across that wide variety of perspectives, that in the end, we would have to wind up finding some sort of compromise to put forward standards in a process that would work for our community. And we also knew that, of course, across the United States, other jurisdictions are dealing with short-term rentals. And we did a lot of research to learn how they're being dealt with across the US. And in part of that learning, we wanted to see what was working and what didn't, but also to get a better idea of what are the short-term rental impacts on neighboring properties and how is it actually appropriate to deal with them in our community. We also recognized, as part of that research, that standards are very likely to evolve over time, and that's something that we fully expect as part of this process for our own standards as well. Also recognizing that any standards that we put into place, enforcement of those standards is going to be critical. And then the last item is a recognition that short-term rentals should be seen as a privileged use, meaning that there are some additional standards and requirements for short-term rentals above and beyond, say, for residents that would be required. And I'm going to go into that particular definition a little bit more later. Now, back when we started, we kicked off the project kind of identifying what some of our primary goals that we wanted to get out of this. And out of that series of goals, we developed a mission statement that's shown up on the screen. And I'm showing it here because it was very important to us to go back to this statement, to this kind of guiding set of principles throughout the process, because these are some of the things that we have been aiming for achieving as we've established standards. And I'm just going to read that quickly. That we want to adopt simple, fair, and enforceable regulations for short-term rentals that balance competing interests and maximize voluntary compliance. So because of all of the perspectives that we recognize would be part of the short-term rental process, we knew that we had to do some pretty extensive public engagement. And what that looked like starting mid last year was we started reaching out to small groups of stakeholders to get a better idea of some of those top areas of concern, and also started reaching out to impacted agencies. That was followed up in August with a series of 3 public workshops, 2 up in Incline, 1 down here in Reno. Across those 3 workshops, we had 250 to 300 attendees, and that was followed up, or I should say complemented by an online survey that got about 570 respondents. So really good amount of feedback from the public. And then, of course, we've had a series of other meetings and letters that we've received and included with information as part of your packet. And then lastly, and most recently, we had a 21-day public comment period, and that was with a focus specifically on getting comments on the draft language. So we received probably hundreds of pages of public comment. If you've looked through all of the staff report attachments and attachments to the attachments, you'll see there's a significant amount of information in there. Now, we're trying to summarize this down to one slide, so it's a little bit difficult. This is certainly higher level, but we did see some different themes shine through. Some of those top areas of concern that came through repeatedly were related to occupancy limits, the permitting process, and those quality of life issues such as noise and parking. In general, we saw support for actually regulating short-term rentals, but there was some pretty significant variation in terms of how much people wanted to see them regulated. We also heard from the incline community that there was a desire for there to be separate standards up at the lake, certainly for any standards to be put into place to be enforced. A perception from some of the respondents that in their mind that short-term rentals are a commercial use. That's something we'll talk about a little bit more. And then also from the host perspective, the belief that the existing rules in place are sufficient and that some of those conflicts between renters and neighbors could be reduced through better education for renters. So one of the, I think, fundamental issues related to short-term rentals is their characterization as either a residential or a commercial use. And there are differences of opinions in other jurisdictions to whether they're looked at as residential or commercial. However, that is something that, in the opinion of staff and the district attorney's opinion, is that short-term rentals are a residential use, and that whether it's a short-term rental or a long-term rental, it's similar in terms of the actual use itself, using a residential home for a residential type purpose for doing things like sleeping, eating, recreating, etc. However, it is also staff's opinion that although this falls into the residential use category, that umbrella, that it is a specific use type, and that has potential impacts that need to be identified and addressed, and that with a lower number of occupants, that the impacts could be like any other long-term residential use, as long as certain standards are followed. But that as the number of occupants increases, the impacts also increase, and that may require additional conditions or restrictions in order to make that compatible with other residential uses. So with that in mind, staff is proposing a tiered permitting system, and that's based on the number of occupants within the short-term rental. At the lowest level, which is tier 1, 10 people or fewer, a standard short-term rental permit would be required. That second tier, tier 2, would be for 11 to 20 occupants. That would require a discretionary permit with additional conditions of approval. And then that third tier, for over 20 occupants, is considered only to be appropriate in areas where hotels and motels are already allowed and would require commercial standards. Now, when it comes to an STR or short-term rental permit, staff is also recommending, again, that they be considered similar to a privileged license, as they are a privileged activity, and that they could be revoked without board action under certain circumstances, such as non-compliance with the standards. They would need to be renewed annually, and that there is no guarantee of renewal, that standards could potentially change over time. Certainly, safety is another important part of the proposed language and standards for short-term rentals. And so we are requiring a number of safety minimums that would need to be met in order for an STR or short-term rental to operate. That would include things like adequate defensible space, ensuring that there are appropriate number and in appropriate location smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, fire extinguishers, adequate egress, making sure that items like fireplaces and outlets, hot tubs, deck railings are all well maintained. Also, an important part of that safety piece is having annual inspections where those building safety components would be inspected annually by our building inspectors, with the fire components such as defensible space inspected by fire staff. And also an important item to note is that those inspections would need to be passed prior to the issuance of the permit. So before I go into the next set of standards, I just want to note, again, host compliance, I mentioned them briefly before. They're a service provider that deals with hundreds of jurisdictions across the United States, assisting with compliance services for short-term rentals. We have contracted with them for a few different services, a couple that I want to mention here. One very important is our 24/7 complaint hotline that will be operating through host compliance, as well as another service that they provide will be critical to adequate enforcement of the new program, and that's a service called address identification, where they are able to actually tie those online advertisements to a physical real address. So in terms of some of the general standards that we are proposing, first one being that a local agent or local responsible party would need to be designated by every short-term rental, the property owner designated by them, to be able to respond 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, within a 30-minute time frame to deal with issues that arise on that property. Also recommending that short-term rentals be limited to one per parcel, that they could only rent out to one group at a time, that advertisements would not be allowed to be shown unless a short-term rental permit had been issued, and that those advertisements, such as online ones on Airbnb, would need to be, and I apologize, it keeps going back and forth. I think we've got I think the PowerPoint is set to automatically time, so it's moving of its own volition at times. So the advertisements that are shown for short-term rentals, they would need to include some specific permit information, things like the permit number, maximum occupancy, number of parking spaces, et cetera. Of course, we're recommending that no parties or events be allowed at short-term rentals, that there would need to be a display on the outside of every unit with some basic short-term rental permit information, such as the permit number, the occupancy limit, and the complaint numbers, the 24/7 complaint hotline and number for their local responsible party. Also, of course, to ensure that there's adequate liability insurance for each short-term rental and that is specific for STRs, and some educational material that reflects some of Washoe County standards provided inside the unit as well. We are also proposing occupancy limits that would be based on internationally recognized codes, the International Property Maintenance Code, International Building Code, and those occupancy limits would be based on square footage. Any sleeping area is going to be applicable or have these standards apply. If someone wanted to have a bedroom that could hold, say, one occupant, that bedroom would need to be a minimum of 70 square feet. If they're proposing to hold 2 occupants in the bedroom, that would need to be at least 100 square feet, adding an additional 50 square feet per additional occupant. Other sleeping areas, such as, say, a living room with a pull-out couch, would need to be at least 200 square feet per occupant. And then, of course, that maximum occupancy could potentially be further limited if there was insufficient parking available on site, or if the owner decided to self-limit. So this next slide deals with some of those quality of life impacts that we've talked about, and certainly noise is one of the top complaints that we've heard about short-term rentals from neighbors, and that's especially when it comes to things like parties and music or other late-night disturbances. Certainly noise can be one of the most difficult types of issues to adequately address. And I do want to note that we do recognize that the Sheriff's Office has limited resources to enforce calls for things like that, especially with their competing priorities. And this is something that is a concern that they have voiced. However, I do want to mention that how we're structuring the proposals here is that with host compliance being contracted to provide that 24/7 complaint hotline, tying that to the requirement for a local responsible party to be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And with that, any calls coming into the hotline where they would automatically turn around and call that local responsible party, we do believe that those noise issues may be able to be more quickly addressed by having those requirements in place. And we are recommending that quiet hours be established for short-term rentals from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. with an additional technology, I should say, put into place, a requirement for technology called a decibel monitoring device. And that would only be for short-term rentals that have proven to have 2 noise violations, where if it is a problem short-term rental with noise complaints that are proven, that those decibel monitoring devices would need to be put into place to help ensure better I should say, compliance with noise issues in the future. Again, parking is one of the other most frequently cited complaints related to short-term rentals, both here in Washoe County and across the nation. And I'm sure you're aware that up in Incline Village, that parking is very limited. In some places, it's non-existent. And in order to reduce some of the impacts to neighboring properties, staff is proposing that no short-term rental parking be allowed on the street. It would need to be developed on site, and that a ratio be established where 1 parking space would be required for every 4 proposed occupants within the unit. In terms of trash standards, most of the trash standards that are already in place, we believe would be adequate, certainly should be carried over for short-term rentals as well, but with an additional caveat that within bear-prone areas, that either wildlife-resistant carts or bear sheds should be required. When it comes to permit fees, staff is proposing a cost-neutral approach where the fees that we would set would be designed to actually cover running the program, enforcing the program. We certainly do expect that after 12 to 18 months, we would need to reassess that fee structure, and that's something that we'll be taking directly to the board once we move forward in the process. When it comes to enforcement, we are proposing what we're calling a 3-pronged enforcement approach. First prong being that we would proactively pursue licensing compliance using host compliance services for those folks who are advertising and operating a short-term rental without a permit, that we would be contacting them and letting them know, hey, you need to get a permit in order to operate here in Washoe County. Second prong being the safety inspections at permit issuance and then annually thereafter. And then, of course, what we've talked about already with that 24/7 complaint hotline. We're also proposing that fines be based on a scaled system, that they actually be higher than our current fine system. Again, that's something that we'll be taking directly to the Board of County Commissioners next in the process. And then the final part on enforcement is essentially a 3 strikes you're out approach, where if there are 3 violations, confirmed violations that occur in a 12-month period, that the permit would be revoked and there would be a 1-year cooling off period. So staff is recommending that certainly, of course, the proposed changes be approved, but there is one change I would like to recommend being made on the ordinance that you received, that it was Exhibit A1 on page 2. We'd like to remove the reference to the business impact statement. And we'll put in our standard language there. That's something that is generally not required for items that go through or are applicable through NRS 278, which our development code falls under. And then, of course, we recommend that the chair, that the commission authorizes the chair to sign the resolution. If the commission agrees with staff's recommendation, a proposed motion has been included on the screen. And then I do want to point out next steps. After this evening's Planning Commission hearing, if you choose to recommend approval or approval with changes, we would next go to the County Commission in February and March for additional hearings and possible adoption. Once the code changes are adopted, we would then move to what we're calling a grace period, where it would give us an opportunity to do some significant outreach to the community to ensure that that the requirements and standards are well known before we actually get to the effective date, after which the new standards would be in place, and at that point enforcement would start as well. And I also want to point out that any updates through this process we will be posting to our STR website at washoecounty.us/STR. So with that, I'd like to conclude my presentation. I do want to point out that the process so far has been a culmination of some pretty significant efforts by a lot of different folks, a lot of different agencies. We have representatives here this evening. Many of our agency representatives are sitting over here off to my right. We have folks from planning, from building, North Lake Tahoe Fire, Truckee Meadows Fire, the District Attorney's Office, of course, Sheriff's Office, Health District, and the RSCVA as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kelly. Okay, I think we can hold any of our questions off for Kelly, for staff, until after public comment, and we can discuss it up here. So what I'm going to do is call for public comment. All speakers have 3 minutes.
We have
And-
Judith Miller, followed by Carol Murphy.
Good evening again, Judith Miller. I have actually two main objections to your approval tonight. First, I have learned that Mr. Haran has resigned, and he represented District 1, my district, and now there's an empty seat. There's no one here to represent District 1. And if I read the development code correctly, you are chosen as representatives of each of the commission districts, and then there's two north, south. But there is basically no one to represent us other than the people who make public comment, all one of us. The other thing that I object to is that staff has listed 4 findings of fact. I think you may have received copies of this statement, so I'm going to go through it pretty quickly. And I submit not one of these findings is valid, and therefore I object to the motion. First, it says consistency with the master plan. Well, I read that master plan cover to cover. And one of the elements that's emphasized is to provide for workforce housing. Unfortunately, the vacation rentals are in direct competition to providing workforce housing. Goal 2 in the master plan says we're supposed to preserve affordable and workforce housing. This amendment does nothing to do that. The second finding, promote the purpose of the development code. This one was really a stretch. The only purpose I saw that was even remotely related was the one about economic and social advantages. But if you really think about it, social advantages to destroying your community, really? I don't think so. And if you look at the other ones, they're even more far-fetched. Does this amendment promote the public health, safety, morals, convenience, and general welfare? I think not. Does it lessen traffic congestion? That's a good one. Avoid undesirable concentrations of population. And as you've heard, vacation rentals increase population for the day, for the week, for whatever period. Prevent overcrowding of land and facilitate adequate provision of transportation, water, sewage. They do nothing for that. To the contrary, they are all detrimental to those factors. Response to changing conditions, well, I think you can read through that, but this is not the response to changing conditions that I would recommend as a planning commission. I think you can do much better. And no adverse effects, well, that again is not feasible. So anyway, it's your decision, and I hope you will give it due thought and consideration, and I appreciate your giving us the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carol Murphy, followed by Blaine Johnson.
Mr. Chairman, Planning Commission members, thank you for the opportunity to address the short-term rental regulation proposal. My name is Carol Murphy. I'm a realtor, broker of Terabella Properties, and chair of the Reno Sparks Association of Realtors Legislative Committee. It should be noted that the Reno Sparks Association of Realtors and the Incline Village Realtors submitted written comments during the public input period, and the letter should be contained in your packet. To be clear, vacation rental regulation is not a specific realtor issue, but a private property rights issue. The homeowner has a right to own, sell, and rent their property. Additionally, we do not defend bad tenants or bad neighbors, regardless of whether it's short-term, long-term, or owner-occupied. We also support across-the-board enforcement of nuisance ordinances, whether they're noise, parking, trash, etc. Kelly and the county staff are to be complimented for reaching out to all those interested in this regulation. Vacation and short-term rental regulations being addressed throughout the country, oftentimes with little input from those who will be impacted. Clearly, in this case, all efforts have been made to seek public input. Here are some specifics I wish to address. 30-minute response time is a concern. Lacking specific definition of response, the language could be interpreted as requiring physical response. Washoe County is a large area. 30-minute physical response is too limiting, and we would request either a more specific definition of the meaning of response or a significant increase in time. It's also my understanding that additional occupancy within specific limitations during daytime hours is generally accepted throughout the county, and that occupancy limits generally allow increased occupancy where children below a certain age are exempt. Infants and toddlers should be exempted from the total occupancy count. Parking, as we've talked about, is always an issue, regardless of whether it's a short-term rental. Particularly in Klein Village, parking should be uniformly enforced across the county regardless of property use. On-site inspections, well defined, but the language as to whom conducts the inspections is confusing. In staff's explanation, it appears general inspections are conducted by the county, but the regulation language, it appears that there are multiple inspections, one by the county and one by the fire agency. This potentially stacking inspections can be very costly. And lastly, the issue of exterior signage raises the issue of home safety. Exterior signs can be an open invitation to burglars and those preying on visitors. I'd like to thank you for allowing me the time to express our concerns. Thank you.
Thank you.
Blaine Johnson, followed by Mark Alexander.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Blaine Johnson. I own Sun Bear Realty and Management up in Incline Village. We do vacation rentals and long-term rentals. I'd like for you to consider through the permitting of these homes for vacation rentals that you run it somewhat similar to how RSCVA already recognizes it, in that as an individual, you're required to register with RSCVA for the taxes. If you are under a property management, you're only required to have my permit. And we then report to RSCVA for each individual properties as far as income and collecting taxes and paying those taxes out. So similarly, you could consider that if you were under a Nevada licensed property manager under NRS 615.6054, that you would only require one permit under a proper licensed property manager, and that we would do all of the reporting similarly again as to what we do with RSCVA. It's been found and discussed that properties that are under a licensed property manager have significantly less problems than those that are managed by people that are outside of the area, i.e., taking the reservation, living in the Bay Area, and not having a responsible person on site that can respond to those nuisance issues that we were talking about. So I hope that you'll consider that as a recommendation. Thank you for your time.
Mark Alexander.
Mark Alexander, Crystal Bay. And I'm mentioning Crystal Bay on purpose. It was devoid from the presentation you heard from staff. Although it's been personally brought to staff's attention, there is another community in Washoe County, in Lake Tahoe, called Crystal Bay. And it's devoid of mention in any of these recommendations in this by being brought forward. Crystal Bay also has short-term rentals in it. We are sometimes confused with Incline Village, but we are clearly not Incline Village. Our roads are one-lane roads. I don't know how many times you guys have been up there to take a look at it, but You cannot drive through Crystal Bay and pass two cars, except on one road, and that's Lakeview, which coincidentally is a road that we live on. We need to be careful with what we're doing, and I applaud staff's work in looking at parking. There isn't any parking in Crystal Bay unless you're parking on site. Typically, that parking is limited to 1 to 2 cars per residence. I don't really care how many bedrooms you've got at that location. And there's no on-street parking that's really plausible. You can't get a fire truck through. Fire trucks are wide. We did have a fire at a short-term rental a few years back. Chief Ryan, who's sitting here, may have responded to that fire. That was before he was chief. And a short-term rental occupant decided they were having trouble starting the fire. They weren't mountain wise. They decided to get a can of gasoline, I presumably from the garage, brought it in and tried lighting the fire. But they dribbled the gasoline through the house, threw gasoline on a smoldering fire, and guess what happened? And it took the whole house out. We dang near lost not only that, they lost that house, but we could have lost a heck of a lot more in our community because there was no instruction to the occupants on how you start a fire. There aren't necessarily smart people that are mountain-wise smart in how to start a fire and keep your house and keep yourselves warm using a fireplace. There needs to be clear instructions provided. What you do needs to be adequate materials, and all this needs to be detailed and provided to whomever is renting that place. I sure as heck don't want my house going down because of some short-term rental in the location. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Next.
I have no further requests for public comment.
Well, give everybody one more opportunity for public comment. Okay, I'm going to close the public comment, bring it back to the commission for questions of staff.
Mr. Chair.
Jump up at the same time.
This is a question for Ms. Mullen.
Is your microphone on?
Thank you. With reference to the, during public comment, I heard in terms of one permit under property manager. I have concerns about how each property would be inspected. Can you speak to that?
Thank you for the question. Certainly. So our recommendation is actually that the property owner for every short-term rental be the permittee, that they may have an agent, such as a property manager, go through those, that process, the permitting process for them. But in reality, it's the property owner who's the permittee. And with our current proposal, as part of that process before the permit would be issued, they would have to have the appropriate inspections by both building and fire. Those are things that would be built into the permit cost, but both of those would be required.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair, if I may. Ms. Mullen, in terms of, I know that the majority of all of the testimony that we heard comes from the lake, but for clarification, this short-term rental is countywide.
Correct. Thank you for the opportunity to clarify that. Yes, this would be a countywide ordinance. We do have some, I would say qualifying language in the proposed ordinance where there are certain components that would only be applicable to the lake or to bear-prone areas. Examples would be things like for the on-site parking that's required that would need to be developed on-site. If it's in an area that's in the Tahoe Basin, it would be required to be developed to TRPA, Tahoe Regional Planning Agency standards for parking.
Okay. And then just to compliment you on your very professional presentation, and to note that in the presentation, you did include Incline Village and Crystal Bay. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Bruce. I'm very concerned about enforcement, and I'm also very concerned about, it says, you indicate standards likely to evolve over time. And it's been my experience with standards that much more often than not, they tend to be relaxed rather than strengthened. And I think that the Tier 1 limit, other than, for example, other than where children, if they are clearly siblings and children, that's one thing, but, and even that's an issue. There are some families that are quite large, but they're fewer and fewer these days. And I would, you don't make clear about the bedrooms, whether or not that actually becomes a written limit on the permit. In other words, if you only have a one-bedroom unit, does that get written into the permit and limited and enforced?
And if I may?
Yes, please.
Certainly. So, yes, my anticipation is that when we get to that point where we have permits that are actually being issued, that would include things like maximum occupancy, would include the information that was submitted as part of the application itself, where it's identifying the specific areas that are proposed to be used for sleeping areas, whether they're official bedrooms or other areas. That's actually something that during the permitting process that we would be checking to make sure that it meets our standards, and it would also be inspected during the inspection process. But yes, absolutely, that is expected to be part of the permit itself. And we are also proposing that on the advertisement, any online advertisement that someone has for a short-term rental, that they would actually have to include the number of bedrooms and beds that are associated with that issued permit in the advertisement to make it clear.
Okay, that's good. I would like to have seen more of it here, but that's good. I had another question. Hang on. Pardon me, I made notes while you were speaking, and now I have to find them again. Please forgive me. Yes, here it is, the permit fees. You say the fee recommendations will be released early 2020. I would like to see those in terms of having a much better idea of what is going to be involved and what is how it's likely to work. Because at present, I don't see how it's likely to, and it's not that I'm saying it won't, I just don't, I'm saying I don't understand it, and so I'm having trouble saying, yeah, let's do it. I think we may be a little, putting the cart a little before the horse at this point. I think that we need to maybe wait another month or three and get a little bit more done on this. And so when in early 2020, since we're in 2020, how early will the fee recommendations be made?
Thank you for the question. Certainly. So fee information is not included here simply because it's not part of what would be going in Chapter 110, the Development Code, so not technically under the purview of the Planning Commission. However, it will be going directly to the Board of County Commissioners. If this moves forward, we will be bringing a proposed fee schedule to the County Commission to review. So when we say early 2020, assuming, let's say, if we were to move forward today, then I would expect that we would be before the Board of County Commissioners likely at the end of February as well as in March. And just to give you a little bit more information in terms of what those fees will be covering and what we are doing in that regard, because our goal is a cost-neutral fee approach, we are currently looking at what all the costs are expected to be associated with running this program and in implementing and enforcing this program. So it is going to include things like the host compliance service contract that we talked about, covering those items items, that being the address identification, 24/7 complaint hotline, as well as a third item we contracted with them for, which was mobile registration. Will also include things like one additional code enforcement officer that we expect to be needed as part of ensuring that we're able to enforce and run this program. And we are looking at any additional costs that may be associated with that as well. I hope that answers your question.
That helps. Thank you. And I do want to support what you've done. It's been a bear you've been wrestling, and we appreciate it. And please don't think that I'm denigrating the work that you've done. Part of it is, you know, I'm old, so to speak. Anyway, I had one other question, and you talked about a decibel monitor. Who's going to pay for that after the second offense?
Certainly. So what we are envisioning for that is that if there is a second confirmed noise violation, that the property owner or their responsible party certainly would need to actually get a decibel monitor device established on the property. There are several commercial businesses that offer decibel monitoring devices. Prices range, but it generally includes some sort of, physical devices themselves that are placed on the property, potentially in, different areas, as well as a subscription service that my understanding is that those are actually most frequently used by property managers as part of their overall noise management plan. And it allows them to set a certain decibel threshold over which, if something happens that's over that decibel threshold, then the property manager could be signed up to receive an automatic text on their phone so that they're notified if there's potential noise issues at that property, so they could potentially deal with that immediately as opposed to waiting for a complaint to come in. But that would be the responsibility of the property owner and or their local responsible party to ensure that those are put in place on the property. And I do want to point out on those as well that they are literally only monitoring decibel levels, no recording of conversations or anything like that. It's just, at what decibel is noise occurring on the property.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm done.
Chair Chesney?
Yes?
Just a quick question. If a home falls under a certain HOA or has CC&Rs that do not allow short-term rentals, how is the county going to handle that? Is that through the permitting process? Or are they leaving it up to the HOA or the CC&Rs?
Thank you for the question. Certainly that's something that has come up a lot during this process, and I know that we've had a lot of concerns from community members related to CC&Rs and HOAs and that kind of overlap with the short-term rental use. So one of the things that we are proposing to include in the ordinance and in the application itself is a recognition by the property owner, the permittee, that the issuance of a short-term rental permit does not relieve them of the responsibility of complying with any other rules, regulations, statutes, restrictions, such as CC&Rs that are on their property. So if they have, CC&Rs in place or an HOA that does not allow for short-term rentals, that's something that, having that permit is not going to relieve them of having to comply with those.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, I got one. It was a good point that was brought up, Kelly, on the 30-minute response. Does that require a physical response, or so they notify the manager and he just makes a phone call and, he can't connect with anybody, but it made the attempt?
So in setting out that standard, what we envisioned was that the local responsible party would need to be able to physically respond within 30 minutes. However, recognizing that some sorts of issues may not require a physical response. So if someone is able to get a complaint and then they call the renter and say, hey, you guys need to turn it down, and if that resolves the issue, then fine. But if it's something else that requires an actual physical response, they need to be able to get there within 30 minutes. That's what we had envisioned.
Great, thank you. Do we have
Any other questions? Commissioner Civilcheck.
Thank you, Chair Chesney. With reference to in multiple inspections, in your presentation, you said annual inspections by building inspectors and fire staff, and then no duplication of services. So can you further explain that, please?
Certainly, happy to, thank you. Yes, so for those items within the home where we're talking about things like ensuring that the deck railings are safe and the, outlets are well maintained, and where the carbon monoxide detectors are in place, smoke detectors, et cetera. Those kinds of things would be inspected by the building inspector. We expect that to be a relatively fast inspection that could occur, but then those items that are fire specific, such as defensible space, or if there is, say, a sprinkler system in the home, then we would expect fire staff to inspect those. So we say no duplication of services because they're looking at different things where there's not going to be an overlap. So we want to make sure that everyone's aware that, you're not paying to have the same thing done by two different sets of people.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Any further questions?
Kelly, just a quick one. Again, thank you for the wonderful presentation. You went out and nationwide and looked at it. How did you come across the limit of 10 for one? I mean, just because it's a lot of concern.
Certainly, you're talking about for the Tier 1 limit? And so, that was something that we discussed pretty extensively in terms of what are those, what is an appropriate threshold for each of those tiers. And specifically for the Tier 1 threshold, we looked at a couple of different things. There's several different examples that kind of had that number make sense to us. One of those mentioned in the staff report was that the cutoff for, say, a group home versus group care, residential use versus different type of use, was 10. Also within, I believe it was the International Building Code or International Residential Code, that some of those classifications where 10 came into play as well.
Thank you.
Chair Chesney.
Commissioner Civilcheck.
Thank you. Just to reiterate, you said it in your presentation, but just to confirm that this body would have no jurisdiction over fee structure.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any further?
Kelly, I want to thank you and all the staff that worked with you. You've done a tremendous job. This has been a journey. And I really want to thank you for the terrific job. I also want to make the comment that this is not a standard that's going to be etched in stone. This thing is going to be reviewed. It's going to be a living, breathing document. It's new to all of us, not only from the staff side, the enforcement side, but for the owners, and we need to keep that in mind. This is something that was requested by the folks that live in, near, and around, and participate in these things, and so we're giving it our best shot at this point in time. So if there's no further questions to staff.
I have a question.
All right.
In this, is there a written sunset or something similar saying that it has to be reviewed in 2 years or 3 years or?
Thank you for the question. No specific written sunset, but we fully anticipate that will be part of our process after, and that's something that we'll probably discuss with the county commission as well, both effective date and then revisiting date. We expect to, within the first 6 months, even have a significant amount of data that's going to help us in determining how effective we are certainly in the permitting process, but then as time goes on, also how effective those standards that are put in place are. So we expect to, start doing that kind of debrief and revisiting, I would say probably within the 12 to 18 month period after program launch.
Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing, bring it back to the commission. Is there any discussion amongst the commissioners?
I'd like some sort of formal recommendation of a review, say, no later than 2 years after it becomes effective. Formal review.
So do you want to put that in the motion?
I could, I'm not sure which one to put it in.
We just have one.
You made the call.
Okay.
Wait a minute, is there any further discussion? Then I'm, okay, I'm going to call for the motion.
Well, technically, there's three, well, okay, 1908 and 1905.
We're looking at item 8B.
8B, yes, all right. I move that after giving reasoned consideration to the information contained in the staff report and received during the public hearing, the Washoe County Planning Commission recommend approval of WDCA 19-0008 to amend Washoe County Code Chapter 110, Development, parentheses, Development Code, close parentheses, within Articles 302, 304, 306, and 410, and with new Articles 319 and 809 created as identified in Exhibit A, and with the additional changes discussed this evening, which include a formal review of these amendments within no more than 2 years following the effective date of approval by the Washoe County Commission. I further move to authorize the chair to sign the resolution contained in Exhibit A on behalf of the Planning Commission and to direct staff to present a report of this commission's recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners within 60 days of today's date. This recommendation for approval is based on all 4 findings within Washoe County Code, Section 110.818.15, parenthetical E.
Kelly?
Mr. Chair, if I may, I just want to verify with the motion maker that that would also include removing that reference to the business impact statement as noted in the presentation. And that was on Exhibit A1, page 2.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's fine. I forgot that.
Thank you.
My apologies.
Okay, is there any discussion?
No, we need a second.
A second first.
Do we have a second on the motion?
I second.
Okay, so we have a motion by Commissioner Bruce with an amendment on it and a second by Commissioner Donchek. Is there any discussion on the amendment or the motion? Okay, call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay, we'll move on to item C, Development Code Amendment, case number WDCA 19-005, Emergency Communication Facilities. Secretary Lloyd.
We have to wait for him to get to the podium.
He's presenting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Trevor Lloyd with Planning and Building. This is a Development Code Amendment, case number WDCA 19-0005 for emergency communication facilities. For possible action, hearing, and discussion to initiate an amendment to the Washoe County Code, Chapter 110, within Article 324, to add new language in Section 110.324.50E, monopole antenna, and Section 110.324.50F, lattice towers in Washoe County Code, to establish placement standards regulating emergency service communication facilities which are owned and operated by governmental agencies and other matters necessarily connected therewith and pertaining thereto. If the proposed amendment is initiated, public hearing and further possible action to deny or recommend approval of the proposed amendment, and if approval is recommended, to authorize the chair to sign the resolution to that effect. If approved, the amendments would include the removal of special use permit requirements for governmental entities for certain monopoles or lattice towers operated for purposes of emergency communication systems. So basically, that description kind of describes the whole thing, the function and purpose of this proposed amendment and the rationale for its request. The applicant is Washoe County Technology Services. The applicant's representative, as well as the applicant from Technology Services, are available to answer any questions that you might have. But the intent is to provide for an expedited process for establishing communication services throughout Washoe County, which we anticipate will happen fairly quickly. Again, this request is to amend essentially two sections of Article 324, Communication Facilities, and to remove the requirement for special use permit under certain circumstances when they're located in certain locations. Again, above is the proposed changes, this slide and the next slide. The first with Article 324E, regulating monopole placement. I want to point out one inaccuracy in the staff report, and that has to do with the location under subsection II and this applies for both monopoles and lattice towers. We originally, under a previous draft, identified a location that cannot be within 200 feet of a significant ridge line. However, it was pointed out by the applicant that the mapping for such ridge lines is sometimes very, very difficult to determine and almost impossible to enforce. So we got rid of that language and added the language that is in the ordinance within your packet, that it cannot be located adjacent to or on a significant or protected ridge line. And again, that is the correct language that is inside your ordinance, so that I'm just referencing that so that there's no confusion. The staff report is different. Okay. So the language for the two sections are almost identical. One is for monopoles, which this board has seen over the years, as well as lattice towers. I'm sorry, go back to monopoles and lattice towers. Again, the language is almost identical. The idea is that we anticipate a number of placement of monopoles and lattice towers throughout Washoe County, in many cases in very remote parts of Washoe County, such as the high desert area, and locating on already established communication sites that we've identified in this section of code. So where you have these existing communication facilities, already established sites, as well as very remote locations, the need for a special use permit, it seems like it's an undue burden on the applicant. Additionally, this will only pertain to communication sites that are owned and operated by a governmental agency for the purpose of emergency communication. So it serves a needed public interest. And again, it's to expedite the process by eliminating the need for a special use permit. Now, we did hold a workshop on December 12th. There were 3 people present. There was no real negative feedback by any of those members present. It was also legally noticed within the Reno Gazette-Journal for this hearing. It meets all of the necessary findings necessary to recommend approval for a code amendment. And staff offers the following motion for your consideration. Now, it's a 2-part motion. The first part is the initiation of the Development Code Amendment. The second part is the amendment itself. That concludes my presentation. I can answer any questions at this time. Also, the applicant's representative and the applicant are here too.
Any questions for
Chair Chesney.
Commissioner Sedillo?
Thank you. So with this, has this I'm assuming, but you can clarify, this is taken into consideration the advancements in satellite placement and such to enhance emergency communications across the globe. Has that been considered in this?
That would be my understanding. Certainly with enhanced technology comes different needs, different requirements. Keep in mind, we anticipate that we will need to open up all of 324 and take a look based on just what you said, new technologies, new needs and requirements. But I think maybe that question might be better left for the applicant if he wants to come down.
Okay, thank you. Trevor, I thought you could have answered it.
Good evening, Quinn Korbulik, Washoe County Technology Services. So your question was regarding satellite communications?
Well, because we're hearing a lot in the media right now in terms of the enhanced placement to enhance communications in remote areas, and particularly addressing remote areas, and this addresses the remote parts of Washoe County where we have limited service. So I'm just asking if that's taking that into consideration, tying into those technologies.
Well, so the particular technology that we're using is a technology called Project 25. It's a standard public safety radio communication standard. And the system that we're implementing requires the radio antennas and the receivers to be on a tower. Typically being on the top of a peak or a mountaintop is the ideal placement. In the northern portions of the county, we have very limited radio communications, but we do have services up there with our sheriff's office, with our roads department, and so they use radio communications, and so that's why we're looking to add new communication facilities in the northern portions of the county. And this particular change is really only addressed with one particular site that we're looking at building. One other site is in Sparks, a greenfield site in Sparks. Another greenfield site will be on county land, and so will be impacted by this change. And the other sites are in the northern portions of the county where they're on BLM land, and so we have to go through the federal permitting process for those particular sites.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Are there any other questions?
Commissioner Bruce. I'm not sure you're the proper respondent, but does this have anything to do with 911 response?
Absolutely, it does.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
I just couldn't make sure. Thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant or staff? Then I'm going to close the public comment and bring it back to the commission.
Did we have any public, we have to ask if we have public.
Oh,
No, we have no public comment.
okay, thanks. Thanks, Nate. Okay. Going to close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission. Any discussion or questions? Then I'm going to call for a motion. Do we have
I make a motion. I move that after giving reasoned consideration to the information contained in the staff report and received during the public hearing, the Washoe County Planning Commission initiate the amendment to Washoe County Code Chapter 110 within Article 324, Communication Facilities, as described in the staff report for WDCA 19-0005. Nate, do I have to do them separately, or can I do them together?
I think you can do them together.
Okay. And that I further move that after giving reasoned consideration to the information contained in the staff report and received during the public hearing, the Washoe County Planning Commission recommend approval of WDCA 19-0005 to amend Washoe County Code 110 within Article 324, Communication Facilities, as described in the staff report for this matter. I further move to authorize the chair to sign the resolution containing the Exhibit A on behalf of the Planning Commission and to direct staff to present a report of this commission's recommendation to the Washoe County Board of County Commissioners within 60 days of today's date. This recommendation for approval is based on all of the following four findings in accordance with Washoe County Code Section 110.818.15 in parentheses E.
Okay, we have a motion, we got a second. Okay, so we got a motion by Commissioner Doncheck, second by Commissioner Bruce. Any discussion on the motion? Being none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay, let's move on to Development Code Amendment Case Number WDCA 19-0006, 110406.
Got to put on his other hat.
Okay, this is Development Code Amendment, case number WDCA 19-0006, for possible action, hearing, and discussion to initiate an amendment to Washoe County Code at Chapter 110 within Article 406, Building Placement Standards, to add a new section to allow for variance or modification of building placement standards, including setbacks, minimum lot size, or minimum lot width for commercial and industrial regulatory zone parcels in conjunction with the approval of a special use permit or tentative subdivision map applicable to the subject property and without the need to file a separate application for variance or modification, provided that the standards to be varied or modified are included in the notice of their hearing on the special use permit or tentative map application and other matters necessarily connected therewith and pertaining thereto. If the proposed amendment is initiated, public hearing and further possible action to deny or recommend approval of the proposed amendment, and if approval is recommended, to authorize the chair to sign the resolution to that effect. Representing Washoe County in this case is our planner, Julie Olander.
Good evening, Julie. I apologize, my voice. Julie Olander with Planning and Building. So this is both an initiation and a request to amend the Development Code of 406. And as I can read this off too, but basically we're asking to amend for parcels that are either zoned commercial or industrial, that they can come in for a modification to the setbacks, the width of the parcel, the minimum lot size. So that on those parcels only, that those standard building code setback, building standards can be varied. And so this would allow parcels that are that are zoned industrial or commercial to have some variation, some flexibility. What we might see is a large industrial building that is parceled into 3 parcels. However, it's all under one roof. In that situation, it could be owned by individual property owners. However, it wouldn't have to meet the setback requirements. It could come in for a special use permit to vary those setbacks. Or it could be under a tentative map, depending on how the development moves forward. However, I do want to just point out that there is an oversight process involved through the special use permit or the tentative map. This was held at an open house meeting. Open house was held on December 12th, along with Trevor's item. And again, there were just 3 people that were there, just for clarification of what this code change would do. And again, it was noticed in the Reno Gazette Journal. Staff was able to make the findings, and that's shown in your staff report on page 3. And I provide a possible motion, and I'm available for any questions.
Any questions? Any public comment?
No public comment.
Well, then, I'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission. Any discussion or question? Do we have a motion?
I motion.
Wow, Commissioner Doncheck.
Let her read this.
Yeah. I move that after giving reasoned consideration of the information contained in the staff report and received during the public hearing, the Washoe County Planning Commission initiate the amendment to Washoe County Code Chapter 110 within Article 406, Building Placement Standards, as described in the staff report for WDCA 19-0006. I further move that after giving reasoned consideration to the information contained in the staff report and received during the public hearing, the Washoe County Planning Commission amend approval of WDCA 19-0006 to amend Washoe County Code 110 within Article 406, Building Placement Standards as described in the staff report for this matter. I further move to authorize the chair to sign the resolution contained in Exhibit A on behalf of the Planning Commission, and to direct staff to present a report of this commission's recommendation to the Washoe County Board of County Commissioners within 60 days of today's date. This recommendation for approval is based on all of the following 4 findings in accordance with Washoe County Code Section 110.818.15, parentheses E.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Commissioner Donchek, second by Commissioner Civilcheck. Any discussion on the motion? Being none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Moving right along. Chair and commission items. Any future agenda items? None. Request for information from staff.
We were asked about a resolution regarding Commissioner Horan. Is that
He did,
about developing it? And I'm just saying.
well, staff will.
Okay,
And you'll see
We'll
again.
do an outline and send it to us, and we can
very good.
add
Thank you.
whereases and whereases and.
I will follow up with an email.
And you
to
got
that.
it.
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. Director's Legal Counsel items, reports on previous planning commission items.
Yeah, I have a couple. You may remember the master plan and regulatory zone amendments that came before here in Bennington Court. That was St. James Village. That was also approved by the county commission in December. And then I received a request from RTC for a planning commissioner to sit on the Regional Road Impact Fee, the RTC Regional Road Impact RIF, GAM. If I'm not asking for anyone to volunteer now, just think about it, and I'd like to bring that forward next month to seek a volunteer and make it official.
As an agenda item?
As an agenda item. Yes.
Great, okay.
Thanks.
Anything else?
That's all I have. Thank you.
Legal information updates?
One thing real quick. You'll recall Lakes at Lemon Valley, which was a subdivision, approximately 100-unit subdivision off of Lemon Drive, just south of the intersection with Military Road. The Planning Commission denied the request for the subdivision tentative map. The County Commission upheld the Planning Commission's denial. The developer sued and challenged the denials in district court. The district court judge overturned the county's denials and ordered the subdivision approved. The County Commission appealed that order of the district court judge, and then the case was assigned by the Supreme Court to their settlement program. The County Commission recently approved a settlement of the litigation that entails approval of the subdivision with a 2-year delay on their ability to sell lots. A couple of other provisions, one being that they have to submit an engineered proposal allowing a left-hand turn out of the subdivision. That was the major issue for you all as a planning commission in denying that, because it was right in, right out only. They have to submit an engineered proposal for a left-hand turn to RTC. If RTC okays that, then the developer has to build it. If RTC says, no, it's our road and that's not how we're gonna do it on our road, then it goes into effect as is with the right in, right out. The developer also waives any damages claims against the county. They claimed to have lost a sale. They had a pending $2 million sale on the property in escrow at the time of the appeal. That fell out of escrow. They claimed they had a $2 million at least damages claim against the county. They've waived that based on the resolution. So those are the nuts and bolts of the resolution. I wanted to let you know, since you had passed a judgment on that at one point, and it has now made its way through the whole system and through the courts, and that's the resolution that was decided upon. Yes.
Can we make the judge live there?
What's that?
Can we make the judge live there?
Let me do some research on that.
Okay, we got any general public comment, or just, was that all, Nate?
Yes, that was it. I just wanted you to be aware and know what had happened to one of your cases.
Any general public comment?
No public comment.
Being none, I'll call for adjournment.
Motion for adjournment.
No, wait.
So moved. Hey, you gotta be a little quicker on the switch.
I tried, but you were just talking so fast.
Sorry.
This ties back to your comment, Mr. Edwards, and sorry, I'm coughing here. Are we starting to see a precedence where we are litigating outcomes for development?
I don't see anything, I haven't seen anything that I consider to be alarming in terms of trends. I've been doing land use stuff for 12 years now, just about, on and off. And I've seen, even when I did it back in 2008, 9, 10, 11. In fact, back then there was more litigation on it than there is now. So, but I think it's relatively steady, and I don't see any real paradigm shifts or anything like that.
Okay, thank you.
Doesn't mean we're happy with the outcome of every decision, but
Exactly.
yeah.
For sure.
We're adjourned.
Okay.